For instance, contemporary Viking warriors consuming small pieces of their fallen enemies' hearts or livers, believing these organs held special power. However, not all instances of Viking cannibalism were ritualistic. Historical records describe desperate situations where Norse explorers and raiders resorted to eating human flesh to survive. The Greenland saga recounts how stranded Vikings drew lots to decide who would be eaten during a particularly harsh winter. Modern analysis has revealed interesting patterns in these cannibal practices. The cut marks on bones often show careful, almost surgical precision, indicating these weren't frenzied acts, but calculated procedures. Some bones show signs of being broken to extract marrow, while others bear marks suggesting specific organs or muscle groups were targeted. Viking psychological warfare often incorporated cannibalistic displays. They would sometimes prepare and eat human flesh in view of enemy settlements, creating terror among those watching. This strategy proved particularly effective against Christian populations, who viewed cannibalism as an ultimate taboo. Recent archaeological techniques have provided new insights into these practices. Isotope analysis of human remains can now reveal whether an individual had consumed human flesh in the months before death. Several Viking warrior remains have shown such evidence, supporting historical accounts of ritual consumption. The practice appears more common in certain regions and periods. Areas of intense Viking Christian conflict show more evidence of cannibalistic activity, suggesting it may have been used specifically to horrify and intimidate Christian opponents. The practice seems to have declined as Vikings increasingly converted to Christianity. Forensic anthropologists have identified different types of cut marks, indicating various purposes. Some marks suggest meat was stripped for consumption, while others indicate ritual mutilation or trophy taking. This has helped researchers distinguish between survival cannibalism and ritual practices. The Norse sagas provide additional context, describing cannibalism as both a practical survival measure and a magical practice. Warriors sometimes consumed small amounts of enemy flesh as part of blood brotherhood ceremonies or before major battles, believing it would grant them supernatural strength. Environmental evidence suggests some instances of cannibalism coincided with periods of extreme food scarcity. Studies of ice cores and tree rings show several severe climate events during the Viking Age that could have driven people to desperate measures. Archaeological evidence indicates that cannibalistic practices weren't universal among Vikings. Many settlements show no evidence of the practice, suggesting it may have been limited to specific groups or circumstances. Some regions show evidence of the practice being formally outlawed as Christian influence grew. Understanding Viking cannibalism requires looking beyond simple barbarism. It existed within a complex cultural framework involving beliefs about power, survival, and warfare. While shocking to modern sensibilities, these practices reveal sophisticated, if disturbing, beliefs about the relationship between body, spirit, and power in Viking society. The legacy of Viking cannibalism continues to influence how we view their culture, though modern research suggests a more nuanced picture than traditional accounts of mindless savagery. Like many aspects of Viking society, the truth lies somewhere between myth and reality, challenging us to understand these practices within their historical context. While tales of Viking cannibalism may chill us to the bone, perhaps even more terrifying were the warriors who fought with such savage fury that some believe they weren't entirely human. But what really drove the legendary Berserkers into their frightening battle frenzy? Berserkers, warriors of frenzy. These warriors were so consumed by battle rage that they bit their shields, howled like wolves, and charged into combat wearing nothing but bare skin. These were the Berserkers, elite Viking warriors whose name still echoes through history. Their very name tells their story. Ber meaning bear and seeker shirt in Old Norse, marking them as warriors who fought with the ferocity of wild bears. When Berserkers entered their infamous Berserker gang state, witnesses described an almost supernatural transformation. Their bodies would shake, teeth chatter, and faces swell and redden. Then came the rage, a blind fury that made them seemingly immune to pain and capable of extraordinary feats of strength. Recent scientific research has shed new light on how these warriors achieved their legendary fighting, stately agaric mushroom. New evidence points to a different source. While earlier theories suggested they used the henbane botanically known as Hyoscyamus niger, this common plant, found throughout Scandinavia, produces effects remarkably similar to recorded berserker behavior, including increased aggression, pain resistance, and superhuman strength. A fascinating discovery in Denmark lends weight to this theory, offering a glimpse into the potent intersection of Viking society, ritual, and psychoactive substances. Archaeologists dug out a pouch of henbane seeds buried alongside a woman in a grave dating back to 980 CE. The presence of these seeds suggests that henbane held significant importance, potentially as a tool for spiritual or warrior rituals, and sheds light on the cultural practices of the time. Unlike the elusive and highly prized fly agaric mushroom, henbane was far more accessible. It thrived in the northern European climate and could be easily cultivated, providing a dependable resource for those seeking its mind-altering effects. Its psychoactive properties, when carefully prepared, were known to induce visions, heightened aggression, or altered states of consciousness, qualities that would have been highly desirable in warrior ceremonies or religious rites. The inclusion of the seeds in the woman's burial indicates their ritualistic value, perhaps tied to her role in society. Was she a seer, a healer, or a spiritual guide entrusted with mediating between the natural and supernatural realms? The deliberate placement of the seeds in her grave implies that henbane was not merely a utilitarian crop, but a substance imbued with sacred significance. The Berserkers' fighting technique was unlike anything their enemies had seen. They would enter battle without armor, protected only by animal skins, believing themselves invulnerable to weapons. Historical accounts describe them biting their shields, howling like beasts, and charging enemy lines with complete disregard for their own safety. But this legendary fury came at a terrible cost. After the Berserker gang faded, warriors would experience days of physical and emotional exhaustion. Some sources suggest they became temporarily weak as children, unable to lift a sword. Modern medical knowledge suggests these symptoms align perfectly with the after effects of henbane use. Berserkers held a complex position in Viking society. While their fighting prowess was valued, their unpredictability made them dangerous. They served as elite shock troops for Viking chiefs and kings, but their tendency to lose control meant they couldn't always distinguish friend from foe in the heat of battle. Archaeological evidence reveals specialized training areas where berserkers might have prepared for battle. These sites show evidence of ritual activity, suggesting that becoming a berserker involved more than just consuming mind-altering substances. It was a spiritual and physical transformation. The decline of the berserkers began as Christianity spread through Scandinavia. Their pagan practices and uncontrollable violence conflicted with Christian values. By the 12th century, several Scandinavian kingdoms had outlawed berserkers entirely. Modern analysis of historical accounts suggests that berserkers might have suffered from mental health conditions exacerbated by their combat experiences. The combination of possible conditions, like PTSD, drug use, and ritualistic behavior, could explain their extreme battle states. Their legacy lives on in modern medicine. The word berserk remains in common use, and their trance-like fighting state has attracted attention from researchers studying combat psychology and altered states of consciousness. Their story continues to fascinate us because it raises questions about the extremes of human capability and the costs of unleashing our darkest nature in pursuit of victory. As fearsome berserkers charged into battle with their legendary fury, many bore intricate designs etched permanently into their skin. But what drove these fierce warriors to endure hours of painful tattooing? And what stories did their marked flesh tell? Viking tattoos and body modification. The Vikings, those legendary seafarers and warriors of the 8th to 11th centuries, practiced an elaborate tradition of tattooing that went far beyond mere decoration. While finding direct evidence of Viking tattoos is challenging, since the skin doesn't survive the centuries, we have fascinating accounts from those who encountered them, particularly from Arab traveler Ahmad ibn Fadlan in the 10th century. According to Ibn Fadlan's detailed descriptions, Viking warriors and traders wore extensive tattoos, stretching from their fingertips all the way to their necks. These weren't simple design. They featured intricate patterns of trees reaching skyward, serpents coiling through complex knots, and rich symbolic imagery that told stories of the wearer's life and achievements. Creating these tattoos was no simple task. Viking tattoo artists used crude tools that would make modern tattoo enthusiasts cringe. Needles crafted from animal bones or metal, dipped in ink made from soot, ash, or dyes, extracted from local plants. Without any form of modern pain relief or sanitation, getting tattooed was a test of endurance that proved the warrior's mettle. The meaning behind these permanent markings went deep into Viking culture. Each design served as a visual record of the wearer's accomplishments, beliefs, and status within their society. A warrior might bear symbols of successful raids or battles, while a skilled craftsperson might display patterns showing their mastery of their trade. Some designs were believed to carry protective powers, especially those featuring symbols of gods like Thor or Odin. The most significant designs included ravens representing Odin's wisdom and guidance, the world tree Yggdrasil showing the connection between realms, and protective symbols like Thor's hammer. Intricate knotwork possibly represented fate's twisting paths, while powerful runes carried special meaning or power. The process of receiving tattoos often tied into important life events and rites of passage. Young warriors might receive their first tattoos upon completing their initial raid or proving themselves in battle. Others marked significant life changes like marriage or becoming a parent. Each new marking added another chapter to the story written on their skin. Beyond their decorative and symbolic value, tattoos served practical purposes in Viking society. They helped identify clan affiliations and could mark a person's role or status. This was particularly important during the Vikings' far-ranging travels, where language barriers might otherwise have made it difficult to recognize a person's standing or achievements. Women in Viking society also participated in the tattooing tradition, though their designs often differed from those of male warriors. Female tattoos frequently incorporated symbols of fertility, protection, and healing, reflecting their vital roles in Viking communities. Some women, particularly those who served as priestesses or healers, might have worn tattoos marking their spiritual authority. The placement of tattoos was carefully considered. Hands and faces, being constantly visible, often displayed status symbols or protective marks. More private tattoos might carry personal meaning or religious significance. The extensive coverage described by Ibn Fadlan suggests that many Vikings viewed their entire body as a canvas for expressing their identity and beliefs. Modern archaeology has provided some indirect evidence supporting these historical accounts. Tools discovered in Viking settlements match the types needed for tattooing, and artwork from the period shows people with intricate skin markings. While we can't know exactly how widespread the practice was, it played a significant role in Viking culture. The decline of Viking tattooing practices coincided with the spread of Christianity in Scandinavia. The new religion often discouraged such body modification as a pagan practice, though some Vikings may have kept the tradition secret or adapted it to incorporate Christian symbols. The legacy of Viking tattoos continues to inspire people today. Modern enthusiasts often choose traditional Norse designs for their tattoos, drawing on the rich symbolism and bold artistic style of the Viking Age. So none of these symbols that are from Norse and Viking origins, well, today's tattoo methods are far more refined than bone needles and soot ink. The fundamental human desire to tell our stories through skin art remains unchanged from those ancient times, while Vikings marked their achievements and status through intricate tattoos that told stories of life and valor. Some customs revealed darker aspects of their culture, none more haunting than the question of how they handled the arrival of unwanted children in their harsh Nordic world. Were they seen as burdens or offerings to the gods? Utbyrda. Infant exposure, known as utbyrda in Old Norse, was a grim but accepted practice in Viking society. Unlike modern societies with their protective laws for children, Viking communities faced harsh realities that sometimes led them to make devastating choices about newborn survival. The practice involved taking an unwanted infant to a remote location, often a harsh outdoor setting like a hillside, forest, or rocky outcrop, and leaving them to the elements. The exposure site was typically chosen to ensure the child would not survive long, seen as more merciful than a prolonged death. Though disturbing to modern sensibilities, this practice was legally sanctioned and culturally accepted throughout the Viking Age. Several factors could lead to a child being exposed. Physical deformities or perceived weakness were common reasons, as Vikings valued strength and capability above all. Economic hardship played a crucial role. During times of famine or hardship, families might expose infants they couldn't feed. Children born to thralls or from extramarital relationships were particularly vulnerable. The decision to expose an infant typically rested with the father or the head of the household. Even after birth, a newborn wasn't considered a true member of the family. until they had been formally accepted by the father and given a name in a ritual called vatni ausin, that is sprinkling with water. Before this ceremony, exposing the child wasn't considered murder under Norse law. Archaeological evidence has revealed sites where exposed infants were left. Normally when we excavate Viking graves, we'd be lucky if there were two teeth left in the grave. These locations often show patterns. They were typically away from settlements, but not too distant, suggesting a degree of ritual in the practice. Some sites contain multiple infant remains, indicating they may have been traditional exposure locations used by communities over generations. Besides the grave goods, but here we have the skeletons fully preserved. The practice wasn't unique to Vikings. Many ancient societies, including Romans and Greeks, practiced infant exposure. However, the harsh Nordic climate made the Viking version particularly swift and final. Unlike warmer regions where exposed infants might occasionally be found and rescued, survival in the cold Norse wilderness was virtually impossible. Not all exposed infants were abandoned to die. Historical sources mention cases where infants were deliberately left where they might be found by others. Some sagas tell of exposed children being discovered and raised by other families, sometimes becoming important figures in later stories. This suggests a complex social understanding around the practice, where direct killing was avoided in favor of leaving fate to decide. The arrival of Christianity began to change attitudes toward infant exposure. Christian teachings explicitly forbade the practice, considering it infanticide. As Norse societies gradually converted to Christianity between the 9th and 11th centuries, infant exposure became increasingly rare and was eventually outlawed. Laws and social customs evolved to provide alternatives. The practice of fostering, sending children to be raised by other families, became more common. Communities developed support systems for struggling families, and the church established foundling homes where unwanted infants could be left safely. Understanding this practice helps illuminate the complex moral world of the Vikings. While they were capable of great tenderness and family loyalty, they were also pragmatic about survival in their harsh environment. The same society that celebrated the birth of healthy children with elaborate naming ceremonies could also make the calculated decision to expose those deemed too burdensome to raise. The legacy of infant exposure continues to spark historical and ethical discussions today. It raises questions about how societies handle population pressures, disability, and the value placed on human life. While the practice itself is rightfully condemned by modern standards, studying it helps us understand how communities throughout history have grappled with difficult choices in challenging circumstances. Archaeological discoveries continue to provide new insights into this practice. Recent findings have revealed more about the methods used to select exposure sites and the rituals that might have accompanied the practice. These discoveries help paint a more complete picture of Viking society's approach to life, death, and the difficult decisions that fell between. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.